thanks for coming along to Agile Willy. It's a beautiful day outside, so I do appreciate you coming here to feed your mind rather than your drinking problem outside the sun, outside the bar. We're very lucky to have Mark Pascal with us tonight. I'll introduce him shortly. First of all, I just want to thank Collider Wellington for the use of this space. Much appreciated, and it's great to see these seats filling up this evening. So tonight's talk is going to be called The Blockchain, Redefining Organizations. And we have Mark Pascal doing the talk for us tonight. Mark Pascal has been in the software industry for over 20 years. He is the founder of 3 Months, who are situated just over there somewhere, I believe, and also the founder of the Blockchain Labs. He's organized 2 blockchain conferences, international conferences, Ethereum.nz and blockchain.nz. And his mission is putting New Zealand at the center of the blockchain disruption, which is a pretty decent mission to have. So that's enough for me. I'm going to hand you over to Mark Pascal. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. So yes, thanks for the introduction. And I also, just a quick plug, I also run the meetups in Wellington and Auckland. So just Google Blockchain Wellington or Blockchain Auckland, and there's one on Thursday, this coming Thursday here. Can you all hear me at the back? Yep, okay, just let me know if I go quiet. Right, a little bit about Blockchain Labs, the organisation that's sucking up all of my time at the moment. So a mission to empower organisations to create decentralised solutions. We are an offshoot of 3months.com, as Gavin mentioned, and team split between mostly Wellington and Auckland, but also a few around the globe. Partnership with Brave New Coin, a crypto data and news organisation. And yeah, we use Bitcoin and Ether in our daily transactions. We've actually got it shoehorned into Zero now, and building a little product around that space. 80% of our work is currently overseas. I'll talk about some of our clients now. And if anybody wants a job, we're looking for a project manager or 2, and also developers. Some of our clients, so some pretty people you may not have heard of, but some pretty interesting folk around the globe. So Status.im, they ICO'd, and I'll talk about what an ICO is a bit later. So they are ICO'd 100 million in 3 hours. Back to Earth, in-game assets, Mothership, MobileGo, FBit Sphere. We're currently working on Kyber Network, LA Token, and Polymaths, helping them working through that with their smart contract code and their auditing stuff. So that's a bit about us. I will jump in. So here's what I think. I think we're actually in quite a bad place internationally at the moment. Our organizations, the big organizations that employ most of us, are struggling. They're struggling because they're being disrupted by often small organizations that are using exponential technology, so technologies that have been digitized, and they are moving following Moore's law. They're converging, and they're creating new business models and invalidating old business models. Our governments, they're struggling to make sense of this increasingly borderless world, this new global village. Commerce is now international. Which laws do we use? Where is tax paid? This is really hard. Our whole regulatory law-making process has become too slow. It can't keep up. And increasingly, it's being ignored. The corporations that are succeeding are doing so because they're creating global monopolies. They're obliterating the competition. We're slowly moving to a world where we have one search engine, one taxi company, one news organization, one shop, and one accommodation provider. And within these mega organizations, there's unprecedented centralization of information, of data, of power and wealth. And these organizations and many others are in this arms race to try and capture as much information about us as they can. We have become the user as a product business model is now defining us. Oh, and most of these organizations are based in a country run by this guy, which might be a bit of a worry. These same entities are also in this race against the hackers, with all this data centralized. In the old days, when the bad guys robbed a bank, it affected a few hundred or a few thousand people. These days, it affects millions. The stakes are huge, as we've seen very recently with the Equifax hack, 143 million people affected. They can even affect the democratic process and change the course of history. And of course, who are the bad guys? That becomes a little bit grey. These guys are driven by profit, really interesting article in the Observer, on the Observer website a few days ago around how Facebook are influencing our behavior, and I'm sure some of you would have read about this stuff before. Oh, and finally, our planet is being decimated by us. So the people in control of these mega organizations, the corporations, the governments, they've got the wrong incentives. They are going to be looking after themselves, their voters, their shareholders first. So what's going on? What's going on is globalization, centralization, hyper-capitalism, and rapid change. They've left us in a very fragile state. We've hit the boundaries. So we kind of need something different. So before you all run out and go and buy your underground shelters, or in the case of many Americans, buying up large bits of the South Island, I do believe there's a way to change things, a way to fundamentally re-engineer how we work within organizations and indeed as a society to create a more equitable and stable system. And there's three sort of strands that have led me to this belief, this sort of positive, more positive outlook, and they've sort of happened over the course of my career, and I'll just run through those. So I've been involved in software development all my career, and when I first came across open source, it kind of blew my mind. How can a bunch of unpaid people around the globe create something as sophisticated and as powerful as Linux or Safari or Postgres and give it away for free? What are their motivations? And it turns out there are some very powerful motivations. We've got some intrinsic stuff like helping others in the community, motivated by the feeling of competence, satisfaction of writing great software, fulfillment, and there's more extrinsic motivations. There's the revenue from related products and services, building up skills, job opportunities, higher salaries, more fulfilling jobs, and of course self-recognition and sort of self-marketing. So really my first realization a few years ago was actually groups of suitably motivated people can achieve great things outside the traditional corporate model. The other sort of strand of my life is agility and sort of dealing with rapid change. So imagine you are building a bridge and you get halfway through building your bridge and you realize that due to advances in material science, construction techniques, it's actually cheaper, quicker to knock down the first bridge and start again. And you do it again and again, you never finish. So that's the world that Agile that's the world that we found, the software industry found ourselves in about 20 years ago. And the traditional processes, the waterfall process simply wasn't working. It wasn't the sort of requirements, design, build, waterfall process wasn't working when you've got a world of rapid change and therefore high unpredictability. So Agile turned up, and sort of many of you have obviously sort of part of the Agile meetup, so you know all about this stuff. But Agile turned up as a way to address this ability to build stuff in a rapidly changing world. But what Agile never did was to fundamentally give organizations an inherent sort of agility. It was more in that it helped build stuff but not actually change the fundamental structure of organizations. And many of us working in the Agile space will have seen this quite common scenario where you've got this passionate, fast-moving, open, collaborative team sort of butting up against this corporate world of silos and hierarchy and patch protection and just plain old inertia. And so many of us, especially in Wellington, have seen this many, many times. So today's organizations, they need to be responsive. And clever folk a few years ago sort of said this: if you swap out species and you change the time scales, this is very, very relevant to today. And really, myself and many people starting to realize that the problem, the inherent problem is hierarchy. As organizations scale, they create more layers, things slow down. It's harder for the people up the top to understand what's going on down below. And if you think about it, a few generations ago, in our great-grandparents' time, the people at the sort of lower echelons, the lower ranks, they would have worked their way up, and a lot of what they learnt was still relevant as they went up the sort of corporate hierarchy. The other problem is with hierarchy is that humans, they're kind of messy. Love this slide. See if you can spot anything that might be happening in your organization. In practice, it is really hard to create a true meritocracy when you're dealing with humans and hierarchies. I came across these two books a couple of years ago. The book on the left was a result of a 2-year research study by a Belgian guy called Frédéric Laloux. And he argued that when you have high complexity, high rate of change, hierarchy doesn't work. And there's plenty of examples in nature and in society, like an ant colony or a traffic system, where there are complex systems without hierarchy. But if you take out hierarchy, you have to reinvent systems and processes so that you can utilize the collective intelligence of people and increasingly machines. So Frederick studied a whole bunch of organizations around the world. These were often big organizations, thousands of employees that didn't have managers, didn't have KPIs, didn't have strategies. And he kind of defined this new management paradigm. He labeled it teal, the color teal, as a sort of next stage in evolutionary sort of management theory. And the book on the right by Brian Robertson, he took the principles and created a more prescriptive methodology around how to do this. And a little bit more controversially, I mean, he defines how you run meetings, you know, when you haven't got a manager, how you do sort of, you know, all the sort of practical side of things. But very much aligned. Those two books are very much aligned. So I definitely recommend them. Both have got videos, hour-long presentations on YouTube where they introduce the concepts if you don't fancy reading a book. So for me, it was, and both books stressed this point, that in today's organization, we spend too much time trying to predict the unpredictable, and we should be spending more time listening to reality. So for me, reading those books, there was sort of a light bulb moment where I realized there is actually an alternative way to run organizations without hierarchy, and ultimately organizations that are far better suited to a world of exponential change that we're seeing now. So the third strand, and this is probably why most of you are here, is the blockchain. And so we've seen from the world of open source and the world of holacracy teal that there are alternative ways of organizations working together. But these are still quite niche. Most of our organizations don't work that way. I believe that the blockchain is the enabling piece that will allow some of those concepts, some of those radically new ways of running organizations to scale, to go global. So what I'm going to do is just to give a brief introduction to what the blockchain is, and I'll keep it brief, but it is important for those of you who don't know to understand the basics. And I'm going to break it into two bits. What is the problem that we're trying to solve with the blockchain, and how does it work? What is the problem we're trying to solve? So imagine I have an apple. I live on a street near you. I don't quite trust you. You've got a funny haircut and you come home late, but I want to give you my apple. I don't quite trust you. So I walk up to you, I hand it to you. We went through a value transfer, and I touched it, you touched it. We didn't need anybody else in that transaction. So let's imagine I want to give you a digital apple. That's a bit harder. So I might take a picture of the apple with my digital camera, and I might attach it to an email and send it to you as an attachment. So who owns the original digital apple? It's harder, because I may have sent 6 copies before I sent it to you, to other people. So you might do the same. So who has the digital apple? So this is known as the double spending problem, and it's something that some of the smartest computer minds in the world have been trying to solve for decades. How do you do that? How do you sort of control digital assets? And essentially, they couldn't solve it. So the workaround to this problem is Harold. So Harold also lives on our street. He's a salt of the earth kind of guy. I've known him for years. You've known him for years. We kind of both trust him. So we're going to ask Harold to keep a ledger, a database of who owns digital apples in our street. And we're going to hope that, and that's fine, so he keeps it on a bit of paper or a spreadsheet. We don't care. He holds that record. So when I give you my apple, we just both go to Harold and say, hey, can you update your database so that we know who owns the true digital apple? We're going to hope that Harold keeps a good record. We're going to hope that he doesn't. We're going to hope that he locks his house up at night. We're going to hope he doesn't come back drunk and use the ledger as toilet paper. We're going to hope he doesn't go senile. We hope he doesn't sell the information to Bob up the street, because Bob might be able to use that information for his personal gain. So we're going to put a lot of trust in Harold. So this is essentially how our entire global economy has been built, on that double spending workaround. How we do that. So our banks, our governments, our retailers, even the new disruptors, Uber, Airbnb, they're all based on that fundamental premise of needing a trusted intermediary because we don't trust each other. So an interesting thing happened about 8 years ago. A person under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto solved the double spending problem. So he not only solved it in theory, he released a white paper and said, hey, look, this is how it works, but he also created a real thing, a digital cash called Bitcoin. And he open sourced it, so he pushed it out. Now it's the community. He disappeared. That's not really relevant because it was out in the open source community. But he solved that problem. So Bitcoin is a digital cash, digital currency, and it runs on this infrastructure which he defined, which we now call the blockchain. And the blockchain is kind of a combination of technologies that Satoshi brought together in a very clever way. So some really smart cryptography, some smart gamification principles, a whole bunch of things that nobody had thought of you could do that in this way. So Bitcoin was the first blockchain. It's open source, so many people have copied Bitcoin and created other blockchains like Bitcoin and called it other things, but Bitcoin is the first one. So the second part is, how does it work? How does the blockchain work? So we're not going to go into the plumbing, into the details, just like you don't need to know how email works or the browser works, but you do need to know some fundamental things about the blockchain, how it works. So the blockchain is like Harold's ledger. It's a list of transactions, a spreadsheet, a very long spreadsheet. So with Satoshi's first transaction buying a pizza 8 years ago at the bottom, and your transaction to me today on the top of that ledger. So if you've got a copy of that ledger, you know the complete state of the system. You know exactly who owes who what Bitcoin. But this blockchain is a very different type of database. So on the left here, we've got the current system. So that's our bank, that's Uber, that's the government with a database and a whole lot of security around that to stop bad people hacking into it. On the right side, we've got the blockchain concept. So a peer-to-peer decentralized database. Now, so basically the spreadsheet, Harold's ledger, lives on all of these machines at the same time. So the system is constantly trying to sync up. So when we put a new transaction in, it goes into one node and it propagates out, and within a few minutes the whole system has the same version of truth. So this decentralized system gives blockchain some very unique properties. Two unique properties. Number one, it's not controlled by any central organization. So the developers behind Bitcoin and other open source public blockchains, when they want to release a new version of it with some new updates, they have to convince the community to update each peer, and anybody can become a peer. You can download the software tonight and become one of those peers. All the people in that network have to agree to update it and get the latest version. If they don't, if more than 51% don't, it won't happen. So no central control. The other key principle is that the maths, the cryptography, the decentralization of blockchain means that once information is in the database, it cannot be changed. It's immutable. If you think about it, to take the database down, you'd have to take down all the peers. And in the blockchain database, the Bitcoin blockchain, there's about 30,000, I think, peers out there. So you'd have to take down essentially the internet. It's also immutable to hack into it. There's a big bounty on being able to do that. I think it's got a market cap of 70 billion or something. So a lot of people are going to try to do that. To make changes, you'd have to make changes to at least 51% of the nodes at the same time. And again, that's a really hard thing to do, it turns out. So the other way to think of a blockchain is it's a database so secure that it can be made public. So what Satoshi also did, which was pretty clever, was to introduce scarcity into the maths. So gold has value partly because it is scarce, and there's a finite amount being mined out of the ground each year, and we kind of know roughly how much that is. Exactly the same with Bitcoin. 21 million Bitcoins can only ever be released, and we know exactly when that date is going to be, and we know how much is being mined every day, every month. So if you introduce scarcity and you have demand, you have value. So Bitcoin has value, about 4,000 US currently per Bitcoin. So when I give you a Bitcoin, I'm not giving you anything. All we're doing is both agreeing to update this database that we both trust holds an immutable record of that transaction. So a cryptocurrency is a currency that is controlled by international community-driven laws of transparent open mathematics and not by the laws of people in government. And that's controversial. You know, government controls money, and that's how they control us. So if they start to lose control of that, what happens? We don't quite know. So the other part of the Bitcoin story, or the blockchain story, is that people started to realize soon after Bitcoin was released that it's actually pretty cool. You could not only store a record of transactions of money, but you could this immutable database is kind of useful to storing anything that is of value to humanity. So vote, a deed transfer if you don't trust your government to manage that, a record of birth, death, an insurance claim, a medical claim, a qualification. All these things, when you're looking at this international community, and it becomes pretty useful to put this in a database that we know can be trusted to hold that information. So the next chapter in the blockchain story is something called Ethereum. So remember, the Bitcoin blockchain was designed as a currency, a digital cash. Let's imagine, though, I want to do something more complicated. I want to give you a Bitcoin, but I want to also have some business rules around that say I can only give it to you if these two people also agree, and it's between the hours of 8 and 9 at night. So I want to build complex business logic around that value transfer. So Bitcoin, by design, didn't really have the ability to do that. It was very limited in scope. So a young guy called Vitalik Buterin, who was standing here in May, we brought him over to the conference. He, a few years ago, decided he was going to crowdsource some money and build a new blockchain called Ethereum that was not only a database, a ledger, but also a kind of a code execution engine, a decentralized code execution engine. So you could not only store information, but you could write code, you could write business rules around that information. So he did that and created this thing called Ethereum. It went live sort of 18 months ago as this platform, the sort of first generation smart contract platform. So a smart contract is what we define as kind of those set of rules. So that logic, once we put it on the blockchain, it becomes this self-executing set of business logic that, again, because it's decentralized and there's no central control and it's immutable, that code will run as programmed. Nobody can stop it once it's there. No government, no corporation, there's no central control. So one sort of trivial example that I use to sort of illustrate that change in the way we build systems is gambling. So let's imagine today I want to build a gambling website. So I might write some code, use a database, and create a nice website that allows you to throw a virtual dice and release that to the public. But you probably wouldn't use my site because you wouldn't trust me. You wouldn't trust me that I wouldn't skew the odds to favour me. So my gambling website is unlikely to be successful. But what if I could build a blockchain-based smart contract gambling site where the code, the rules behind what happens when you throw that dice are in transparent, immutable rules that anybody can see, anybody can audit? That is exactly what's happening. So Etherol, iDice raised squillions to do exactly that, create blockchain-based gambling sites and a whole bunch of other people doing the same thing. So what it illustrates is the transfer of trust. You don't need to trust me, you need to trust the protocol. So it changes that to a whole trust thing and allows you to build systems without having to trust that central intermediary. We don't need Harold anymore. So what we have is this new global trust protocol, and this has far-reaching implications around how we architect, how we design our systems in the future. So we've created a world where trust is moving towards distributed networks of machines that no one person, group, or corporation or government owns. These networks have rock-solid data integrity, zero downtime, and financial incentives, the sort of crypto-economic incentives, for anybody who participates. So it turns out one of the first killer apps in this sort of second generation blockchain on the sort of Ethereum world is capital raising. And this is this whole concept of an ICO. So an ICO stands for initial coin offering, and it turns out it's a wonderful way to democratize capital raising. So, and the way it works is essentially you create your own tokenized asset, and anybody can do this. And a token sits in this weird space between a share in a company, a currency, and a fuel for the ecosystem that you're building, a way for users to interact with your system. So it's got these kind of three ways you can think of it. And the problem is the current legal system can't get its head around that very easily, and they're struggling to work out what it is. So this is kind of how an ICO works. And we've helped about 15 people now. We're currently working through 3. So generally the process is create a white paper, which sells to the world your big vision for your new, generally decentralized idea. It may be a gambling, it may be a charity, it could be anything. You may build something, some sort of proof of concept, beta, but kind of optional. You kind of want to do something to show people you can do something. You then want to convince some reputable people to be associated. It'd be great if you can get an ex-prime minister or an ex-head of big corporate to put their weight behind it, to give it credibility. So you need to build up that social capital. You need to create lots of hype. The whole PR, website, nice videos, all that sort of stuff. You then create a token, and ERC20 is the current standard for Ethereum-based tokens, and Ethereum is the platform that all these are being built on. And that token encompasses the business rules around that capital raising effort. So you're stating to the world, if you give me money, i.e. if you transfer Ether or Bitcoin and swap it for my token, this is what's going to happen. And you can build those as complex or as simple as you like. But the point is they're transparent, they're immutable, you define them up front and put them on the blockchain. You start the ICO period. Generally, your ICO period is a few weeks, and you wait for the money to roll in. You may have a cap. You may say, okay, I'm only going to raise 5 million, or you may say it's going to be uncapped. We'll just raise whatever we get in the first 3 weeks, or even unlimited. We're not going to stop. Your ICO period ends, or your cap is reached. And then you need to persuade the exchanges to list your token. So exchanges, and there's a bunch of them internationally, were originally set up to help you convert cryptocurrency to fiat currency, pounds, dollars, yen, and back. Now crypto exchanges are also becoming these token trading platforms that allow you to swap tokens. And there's a bunch of them out there. It's largely unregulated, so buyer beware. And they do get hacked and they do run off with your money every now and again, but there's a few big players who've got a lot of reputation at stake. And then you either buy your island in Bermuda and retire, or you actually build something. And this is the kind of period we're at now. There's a lot of money being raised. We don't quite know whether these teams are going to actually produce anything. So this has been happening at a crazy level over the last 6-9 months. So First Blood, a sports gaming platform, 5.5, this is all US dollars, 5.5 million in 10 minutes. Singular DTV, so they are sort of Netflix, decentralized Netflix killer, 7.5 in 15 minutes. Gnosis, 12 million a week. Brave, so the ones with stars, the ones we've been involved in. Mobile Go, a sort of mobile gaming platform, Mothership, exchange. And then you get the sort of guys who are going for more of a platform play. So, so Ethereum, that's the gambling one. So Status IM, so we work with them. So they raised 100 million in 3 hours, almost brought the Ethereum blockchain to a standstill, and had 20,000 subscribers. So 20,000, we think individuals, but we don't really know, bought a bit of Status. And then we've got EOS. We're now getting up into the sort of $250 million raised sort of world. So and some of these teams, the Status is 2 founders and 20 guys when we were working with them. These aren't big corporations. These are small teams of people. It's incredible money being raised. So, and a lot of headlines being generated. It's sort of surpassing other ways of raising capital quite quickly. But one of the reasons that it is different, and not only because it democratizes it, makes it far easier to get a wider pool of investors. But the other thing is a lot of these ICOs are creating foundations. They're fully open sourcing what they do. They're creating foundations, so much like Linux. So if things go wrong with the founding team, in theory, and a lot of startups fail because the founding teams fall out or get bored or just disappear. In theory, the project can carry on. It can fork. The community can take the funds, the money, and go forward. So it, in theory, gives an added layer of security for investors that you're not just dependent on a couple of guys in Estonia. So yes, I think that's part of the reason why it's gaining a lot of attention. And there's a few rich, nerdy people around the world at the moment. So if you'd have bet, these are some of the early ICOs ordered in sort of the highest capital gain. So 433,000% if you'd have bought next. Even Ethereum, it's a 94,000% increase if you'd bought of ICO and what it's now traded at an exchange. So you can convert your holdings into dollars and pounds or whatever if you want to. So there's a massive world of investment and trading in this world that has come to the fore. But a lot of craziness, and this is a real ICO. we're going to give some random person on the internet some money, and they're going to take it and go buy stuff with it, probably electronics, to be honest, maybe even a flat screen television. So this is a real, and they raised $70,000 US. Now, I've no idea. Perhaps there's some people who've got bots who just search for the word ICO and buy stuff automatically. I don't know, or they didn't speak English or something. But anyway, so this raised a lot of money. So it is completely crazy market out there with people scrambling to buy stuff. And it does, for those of us who are around 1999, 2000, this does remind me a little bit of that craziness with the internet boom, and then it came crashing down in sort of early 2000. So we don't quite know. But yeah, it is, so buyer beware. The other way to think of this is just to really sort of round things off, is in layers. So we had this internet protocol, which turned up a couple of decades ago, and disrupted a whole lot of business models because it allowed us to move information across the globe at almost zero cost. The blockchain layer, this kind of trust infrastructure, which allows these untrusted parties to transact without a third party, now creates this additional layer on top of the internet protocol. It sits on top of the internet. But what the blockchain layer doesn't do out of the box is to create a system that will allow people to work towards shared goals, to do what an organization does. So we need something else. And really this something else is this concept. This is what a lot of the ICOs are doing. They're building these decentralized autonomous organizations. So, and this sits on top. This is written in sort of smart contract code. And so DAOs have governance models that are not controlled by small groups of grey-haired men in closed boardrooms. These rules are encoded in smart contracts, and they automatically execute once certain thresholds are met, with a transparent record that can't be altered. So these rules would typically be grouped into a few different areas. There's reputation, so some sort of non-transferable measure that reflects the degree of alignment of an individual with a group of peers. There might be some sort of value distribution system, so tokens issued automatically when a contribution is registered as valuable by the reputation in the system, by the majority of reputation in the network, and potentially some sort of voting system, so that allows decisions to be made by the community, and perhaps that voting is weighted more towards people with higher reputation or higher token ownership, whatever you decide. But ultimately, these DAOs can and should allow for evolutionary purpose, to bring in some of the teal and holacracy thinking. They should be able to react more quickly, and they should be able to evolve. And they should also be able to support deviations of thinking. And this is what we're seeing in the crypto world, is when there's disagreement within the community, they can fork. They can actually split. The chain forks, and then you get two versions. For a while, one might sort of atrophy and die, but often not. They carry on, and those people will decide which chain they want to join. So that allows that sort of that evolution of organizational thinking. So imagine if we could, so just going right back to the beginning, so imagine if we could create a new type of decentralized social network, some sort of socio-economic network with no central server, nobody storing your personal informations, and you become the owner of your own data, your identity. So status IM, that's their mission. And if you read their white paper, that's what they want to try and do. They want to try and undo the control that the Facebooks and the Twitters have over us, and build a new model that is owned and driven by the community. Imagine a decentralized energy trading platform that allows consumers to buy and sell energy on a peer-to-peer basis without the intermediaries. So Power Ledger is currently, they're based in Australia. They're currently going through ICO. They raised 70 million in pre-sale, currently going to main public offering shortly. Imagine a decentralized food distribution network that connects growers, home cooks, and consumers with kids on e-bikes delivering stuff. Again, this is being conceived in New Zealand now. We're working with the CEO of Cookie Time, of all things, to sort of pull this together, and a bunch of really interesting people who are getting quite passionate about this. So that's just, I guess, a few examples of some of the sort of new business models. And if you spend some time reading the white papers through some of these ICOs, you'll see some really interesting new concepts that are starting to emerge. So I think, just to finish off, out of this craziness, I think we are seeing this emergence of this new decentralized global economy, and we're going to see these new organizations that are living outside the geopolitical boundaries. They will live on the blockchain. Where they sit within the law, my personal feeling is that they're going to sit outside the law. It's just going to happen. But these organizations are going to be able to harness a global workforce who are passionate about their purpose. And these organizations should be inherently more stable, more secure, because they are decentralized. And ultimately, I do think these organizations are going to start to challenge the power dominance that currently we have with the global mega corporations and indeed the governments. Thank you.